Now let's learn about the supply curve. Supply curve is going to be the representation of the relationship between the price of a good or a service and how much of that good or service a producer is willing to produce and sell. So suppose you asked the question of a manager of a firm and said, how much of your product are you willing to produce and sell? The manager's decision is going to depend on a lot of different things. The one variable that enters into the supply curve is going to be the price of that product. But there are a lot of other things that also affect how much is going to be produced and sold. One of those is the wage paid to workers. Another is the price of materials, or the cost of capital, the state of production technology. Again, we're going to look here at expectations like we did in the demand curve. The supply curve, it's producers' expectations about futures prices. And we may look at the effect of subsidies or taxes on how much is going to be produced and sold. But when we are trying to talk about the supply curve, the two variables that we look at the most is the quantity supplied, or how much product are you willing to produce and sell, and what the price of that product is. So let's talk about the individual supply curve first and the law of supply. First, we talk about the quantity supplied. That's how much of a product a firm is willing to produce and sell. The supply schedule tells us different combinations of the price of the good and how much the quantity supplied is, ceteris paribus. So holding all of those other variables that affect how much is produced and sold constant. And then when we look at the individual supply curve, that's the graph that represents the supply schedule. Here's an example of an individual supply curve. We can see we're looking at the market for pizzas, and the price of pizzas and the quantity of pizzas sold per month for one firm. We can see at point A, this firm looks at the price of $2 and says, at $2, I'll sell 0 pizzas per month. That's not a high enough price for me to be able to cover all of the costs associated with producing it and earn enough of an economic return to produce any. At point B, if the price rises from $2 up to $4, we can see that the producer is now willing to increase the quantity supplied from 0 to 100 pizzas per month. This is the law of supply. An increase in the price increases the quantity supplied of a good or a service. And we can see that as an upward slope or a positive slope of an individual supply curve. That's represented in the supply schedule, where as the price goes up, the quantity supplied increases. It's also represented in the individual supply curve, as it's an upward sloping curve. So the law of supply says that there's a positive relationship between the price and the quantity supplied of a good or a service. If we see an increase or a change in the price, and let's talk about an increase in the price, we would expect to see a change in the quantity supplied. And we represent that by a movement along the supply curve. An increase in the price is going to increase the quantity supplied. We also saw that at some price, producers aren't willing to supply any. And that's the minimum supply price. That's the lowest price at which a product will be supplied. How do we go from individual supply curves to market supply curves? We do it just like we did when we looked at the demand curve. It's the horizontal sum of supply curves. So for example, at a price of $6, we can see that Lola is willing to supply 200 pizzas per month. Hiram's not willing to supply any. So the total market supply, if Lola and Hiram are the only producers, at $6 is going to be 200 pizzas per month. But if the price rises up to $8, where Lola is willing to supply 300 pizzas per month, and Hiram is above his minimum supply price at $8, so he's willing to supply 100 pizzas per month. So at a market price of $8, Lola will supply 300, Hiram will supply 100, the total market supply is going to be 400. So the market supply curve is the horizontal sum of the individual supply curves in the market. When we look at an overall market supply curve, we're going to see it's upward sloping because of the law of supply. We see what it means is what price will be charged if 10,000 pizzas per month You'd have to get at least $4 as the price in order to get that quantity supplied. And we can also talk about what might make this curve shift. Right? The supply curve is going to shift if any variable that affects supply other than what's on the axes, the quantity supplied or the price, if any of those other variables change. Now we looked at some of those variables. One of them was the wage of workers. The wage of workers is a significant cost of inputs. Suppose wages go up. If wages of workers go up, we would expect suppliers to supply less of a good or a service. So suppose we look at the price equal to $10. On the original supply curve, price of $10 gets a quantity supplied of 40,000 pizzas. Now, if the wages of workers go up, we would expect less to be supplied. Now, that's a shift to the left of the supply curve. Now, this is a little difficult when we look at the shift of supply curves, because it looks like the supply curve is moving up, and that might be an increase in supply. So what you want to do is be very careful and say, if there's a decrease in supply, it means that the quantity supplied at any given price has gone down. There's a reduction in the quantity supplied, and that's a movement to the left of the supply curve. And as we show that, that is moving to the blue supply curve. An increase in supply would be a shift in the other direction, to the right. So anything which increases the quantity supplied of a good or a service at any given price increases supply, and that's a shift to the right.